Welcome to another episode of Altitude Advantage. I am your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across the table from me, we have our lead writer on DenverBroncos.com, Aric DiLalla. Minicamp and OTAs are behind us, and we look ahead to training camp. And on this episode, we're going to talk about the evolution of the year two wide receivers, how this defense can get better, and take a closer look at special teams. But before we get into all that, we're going to take a closer look to our comments. I know you've taken a sneak peek to see what the fans are talking about.
Yeah, we love reading the comments on our videos. You can go over to the Broncos official YouTube page and leave a comment. We'll read it here on the air. This is from last week's episode about who stood out at Broncos minicamp. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. Today we're kind of like wrapping up odds and ends that we didn't get to last week about minicamp. From Bill Bell, I got a road trip for September 7th to see the Broncos in person. Definitely hope things will go well in week one. He says he sees Harvey as RB1A and Dobbins as RB1B. Ooh. And then mentions that one of the established running backs could be the odd man out. And then adds, no matter what they have to show it on the field, feels like they've had a good offseason, but that's only on paper and competing with air so far. I think that's true. It's hard to know before they get in pads what the running backs are going to be. Yeah. Bill Bell is counting the running backs. We've been told don't count the running backs yet. Don't count the
running backs.
Hasn't started yet. Competition has not started, so just hold your horses a little bit. We'll get there.
Nice pun.
Thank you. Kind of an accident, but I think it was nice. But yeah, the running back competition, we'll get into it over the next few weeks. We're going to have a ton of stuff to get people prepped for camp, but that running back battle is certainly one to watch. Kenny Miller says, missed you guys so much. Heart, heart, heart. Added a let's go, Elisa.
Hey, let's go.
It's kind of, where's my let's go, Aric? That's kind of, okay, I'll get over it. Shot by Hundo says, I'm with Aric. I'm ready for week one. Let's get this show on the road.
There you go. They're with you.
I like that. Underdog 32. What side of the ball are you two most excited about, the offense or defense? Thanks for all you do.
Ooh, I'm a defensive girly.
Yeah.
We know that.
We know that.
Defense wins championships. I'm a big,
I'm excited to see Hufanga, Greenlaw, get those guys out there. But I like touchdowns, and so seeing Bo Nix in year two.
I like pick sixes.
I'm gonna say the offense for me.
Go, Aric.
James Richard says you can't stand out without full pads at the professional level. Come on, man. It's true.
It's true. We agreed with that.
Greenman 7YYY says, have you seen Bo Nix's arms? He's added 3 pounds to each of them.
Why?
I have not measured Bo Nix's arms.
We don't count. We don't measure.
Maybe Greenman 7YYY did. Interesting.
That's a lot of Ys.
And then Mark Wine, kind of interesting because he's whining here, says Denver plays at elevation, not altitude. Playing football a mile high in the air is impossible. We'll just let a TV network here know that. We'll let a bunch of people know that everybody in Denver is doing it wrong. So
Literally.
When they change, we'll change our podcast name. That's it from last week. I like to end on one with a little bit of a blast.
A little bit of a sass.
Yeah,
oh
that's
my
true.
Gosh. Well, elevation, altitude, we can handle it all. So
that's true. I don't think. Did we read comments from the previous week?
I don't think so. Taking a closer look at that. But again, guys, as he's looking for some comments.
Not working. Sorry, if you'll have to comment on that episode, I'll read it later.
If you left a comment on the episode, just keep leaving comments on all the episodes for a chance.
Leave a comment on the next one, and we'll read it.
Yeah, you'll read it. And then you'll get a go Aric, because they're going to be like, you read my comment.
I need it.
Well, as they mentioned, they're really excited to see both sides of the ball get going, whether it's offense or defense. Like we mentioned, we have a lot of new guys on both sides, a lot of new faces. But we have some returning faces. We have some year two guys that are going to take that next step. And looking at the wide receiver room, specifically at Devon Bailey and Troy Franklin, I feel like those are the guys that everyone's kind of really anxious to kind of see that connection continue to develop. They had some big plays last year, and head coach Sean Payton spoke about what he saw from Troy Franklin as he continues to develop going into year two.
There's that repetition is the mother of learning, and you're seeing him play faster with a much greater awareness within each play. He's extremely explosive, and I think he's, I would say, 5 pounds heavier, a little thicker, but he's had a good spring.
I think what I like most about what all the coaching staff does is their patience that they have with these young guys and understanding it's going to take time to develop and they're not measuring them, against each other necessarily, but it's like each guy is going to develop in their own way, and their traits are going to show at their own time. And I think that patience is really going to help play the long game for this team.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that, listen, if you're Troy Franklin or you're Devon Vele, your development is probably accelerated from where most rookies around the league are, just because you had to play a bunch last year. And Sean Payton talked about that at the end of minicamp, where he said, I would hope we're further along than we were last year because we had to play so many young guys because of the salary cap issues we had a year ago with all the dead cap. And so if you're a guy like Devon Vele, if you're a guy like Troy Franklin, you're naturally further along. And, I talked to Troy the other day. If you haven't seen the article, go check it out on denverbroncos.com. Plug. But he said it's night and day from last year. And you hear that all the time with guys going into year two. But that doesn't make it any less true for them. And I think also, like, when rookies come in, they're like, they always say, like, I'm going to be able to handle this right away. And then they get to the year two and they're like, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And Troy talked about learning from Cortland and some of the other vets on the team last year about learning how to be a pro, how to get a routine, how to know what everybody's doing on the field, so that you kind of understand why you're doing what you're doing. And then there's also, Sean Payton always talks about confidence is born from demonstrated ability. He says that a lot, and I like that quote that, like, you can't be confident unless you've gone and done it. And Troy talked about that last year was a tough year for him in some ways, just like getting adjusted to the NFL. He'd had this great connection with Bo Nix in college, and that didn't quite pan out right away in the NFL. And then finally in the playoff game, he gets that big play.
Yeah.
And just one moment when I was talking to him, it made it sound like, hey, I know I belong now. And so we'll see what his role in particular, like, I think we have a better sense of what Devon Vele is, just because he played a little bit more, or had more targets, more catches, right? He was more involved, and he's that, I would say, possession receiver. I'm interested to see, like, how he and Pat Bryant complement each other, because I think there's some similar things that they do well.
Yeah.
And for anyone who maybe missed it, he wasn't out at minicamp. Sean Payton said he's going to be there ready to go for the start of training camp. But Devon Vele, I feel like, is that guy. Troy, for most of the year last year when we saw him, it was like these deep shots, right?
Yeah.
And he talked to me about, and we saw it in minicamp, like, I want to be a guy that can attack the middle of the field too, or have these intermediate catches and show that I'm not just a guy that can take the top off the defense. So typically there are little signs where you kind of, like, my ears perk up a little bit. And, like, if I ask Sean Payton a question about Troy Franklin and he gives a nice answer, that's great. But early in OTA, someone asked a question about Marvin Mims, and Sean Payton kind of on his own brought up Troy Franklin and said, hey, this is a guy who can make a jump like Marvin Mims did. And when that sort of thing happens and he's pulling him as a use case for a guy that can make a jump, that really gets my attention. I think Troy Franklin is just in a much better spot, and I'm excited to see what he does in year two. And it just, Cortland is obviously that proven guy. You've got Evan Engram coming in terms of being a tight end who can attack in the passing game. Marvin, can he take another step? But then, like, it's Troy, it's Vele, it's Pat Bryant, it's Trent Sherfield. Like, those guys, it's kind of like, what are you going to get for them? Who's going to find that role? And I thought, Elisa, like what Sean Payton said at some point during the offseason, it's not necessarily competing for a roster spot. It's like, who's going to get these targets? Who's going to earn these reps in the game? I think there's some really deserving guys. I'm excited to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to talk about, especially as we get into training camp. As the comments said, once they get in their pads, you can really start gauging how each guy is starting to really come along in that kind of scenario when training camp gets going. But speaking of Marvin Mims, special teams coordinator and assistant head coach Darren Rizzi spoke on Mims and how he sees him, especially on special teams.
He's a guy that seems to show up on the plays of the week film every week. We would show our players great special teams plays from around the league. So I've always admired him. I remember him in the draft process because we had a high grade on him coming out. So now that, get a chance to work with him and work together with him and really excited. There's still a lot of things he can do. I don't know if this kickoff return rule is getting as much publicity as it should. I think it's really going to change the game for the entire league this year. We're going to see a dramatic increase in returns.
I think Rizzi said it best. Marvin Mims is going to pick up where he left off, and I think this season as he mentioned, the analytics are going to tell teams to put the ball in play. So I think Mims is going to really excel there, and especially just what he brings to the team internally as well. Like, he called him a great leader, and you've seen him, especially in OTAs and minicamp, talking to the guys and really kind of making sure that he's a presence that's felt there.
Yeah, Marvin's interesting because I do think late last year we saw that he can be a great receiver, right? Like, he stretched the field, those plays against Cincinnati obviously come to mind. But I think that there's this dynamic, and we hear Sean Payton talk about this joker element with guys. There is that joker element with Marvin Mims. And I think that when they started using him in the backfield and he kind of had those different motions, whether or not they threw him the ball or not, I think that helped him in the passing game as well, because now defenses have to come down a little bit. And then if he turns upfield, boom, he's faster than you. But I do think because of, and obviously we know Marvin Mims is a great punt returner, right? Like, that game against the Colts, they may not win that if Marvin Mims doesn't return that punt and set up the go-ahead score.
Yeah.
But I think there was a little bit of like, maybe we've forgotten what kind of weapon Marvin Mims can be in the kickoff game too, just because, as Rizzi said, he didn't touch the ball all that much. I think he had 7 returns last year, much fewer than the year before. A lot of teams either would not kick it to the Broncos or they kick it to Tremont Smith, who was kind of opposite him. And Rizzi did talk about that you've got to know who is that other guy next to Marvin Mims. He mentioned maybe it's a running back with a bigger frame. But now there's this whole, like, the whole strategy of kickoffs has changed. And Rizzi said it, maybe people aren't paying attention as much as they should to what this is going to do, because now if you kick it through the end zone, you're getting the ball at the 35. And let's say that teams still say, hey, it's not worth kicking it to Marvin Mims. Well, now
they might.
They might still say that. Now Bo Nix and the Broncos have that extra 5 yards, and you're basically 30 yards from field goal range, right? Like, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
And
you're playing on a short field if you decide to do that.
Right. Or they do kick it to Marvin, and now all of a sudden he gets more opportunities. He actually averaged more yards per kickoff last year than he did as a rookie, just north of 27. So say you're kicking it to him and he's able to do that, like, you're going to end up with good field position. And I think there's a chance that 1 or 2 times over the course of the season, maybe he can break one. Mm-hmm. And if he can do that in these close games, I like to ask special teams coordinators, especially going into a game against the Chiefs, a game against another playoff team, like, special teams, it feels like it can be the deciding factor. And if Marvin Mims, even, like, say you go to Kansas City and they decide to kick it to Marvin Mims, can he return a kick, even if it's not all the way for a score, into Kansas City territory that sets up a quote-unquote easy score for the Broncos? Like, that could tilt things in Denver's direction. And so I will be interested to see kind of how this all plays out. Like, does it become, do we get to the point where teams are kicking it off into play, or do they still say, hey, we're not messing with certain guys? So it'll be interesting to see there. Rizzi obviously has a lot of respect. I think in general his special teams units have been among the best in the league. Yeah. Denver had a pair of really respected special teams guys, and Mike Westhoff and Ben Kotwika. So you're transitioning now to a guy in Rizzi that's just as well respected. So
he even mentioned that he's like, every week we had Marvin Mims on some kind of tape showing our guys, like showing what to do, showing the difficulty of what he's able to accomplish on the field. So him even having that familiarity with Mims, and now he has that Swiss Army knife in his arsenal, it's really exciting to see what he's going to do with that.
Yeah, definitely. And we know that obviously Rizzi was involved in presenting the change to this rule, and so he should know better than most about how this works and the best way to handle it, both from a return and coverage standpoint. And I wouldn't overlook this. It's kind of in the weeds. It's a little nuanced, but like, if you're a fan, I think this is like, can you win in the margins? This is one of those places where you can. The only thing I wonder is, like, if Marvin starts to just break out as a wide receiver and he's posting 100-yard games, do you still keep him on kickoff, or do you put somebody else there to make sure he's out there on offense? I don't know. So far, we haven't seen that, right? Like, he's been back there. That would just be one thing I'll be interested in seeing how that develops. Yeah,
well, especially like you mentioned, the way that he ended last season, and the hope is that he picks up where he leaves off. And I know that the mindset of this team is like, last year, you start from scratch. I understand that. But it's going to be interesting to see if he can start faster and just kind of really kind of coming to his own when in the earlier games versus how we saw versus Cincinnati on Monday Night Football, and just like those big explosive plays that we always felt were just like half an inch away from happening, right? Whether it was Troy or Vele or Mims, like we always felt like you were just on the edge of going up that hill. And that's why I think year 2 for this team is so exciting, because these are the things you work on during OTAs and training camp and mini camp. You work on the connection. You work on reading body language, reading like almost like reading their eyes, or just like having eyes in the back of your head and just knowing where to be when you need to be there. And I think when you really kind of groom that out, you're able to have bigger results on the field.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think Mims will be a guy that another year with Bo on offense will certainly help him.
Another thing that's going to help us get better is this defense. And defensive coordinator Vance Joseph spoke on the mindset that this team has going into training camp.
You know, we watch every clip from last year, and once you watch it all, you get a clear idea of how they attacked you, right? And it was obvious for us. I won't share that, but it was obvious for how teams attacked us. And you have to go to work to kind of prevent some of that stuff. And that's what you do in the offseason. That's every year. Every year you have to change and adjust because teams see you differently. Our players have grown, you know, to being different type of players. So the respect level for Patrick has gone up. You know, so how we adjust off that's going to be huge. But every offseason we watch every clip and we find out how teams are attacking us and what we didn't do well, and just do those things better. So that's part of the growth and improvement I'm talking about.
Now the cat's out the bag. Like, teams are going to know how to play you. That's not necessarily exactly how to play, but they're going to have more tape on you. They're going to have more tape on Bo. They're going to have more tape on some of these guys. And they're going to change the approach that they have when they play the Denver Broncos. Now, you're probably circling that matchup on the calendar versus last year. It was kind of like, well, what are we going to get when we get there? And I like that he said the respect level, I don't know how much higher it can get, but the respect level for Patrick II is going to go up. And for me, it's like, yeah, but he was so good last year that my favorite stat from last year when it comes to Pat particularly is that quarterbacks would have had more completion had they just thrown the ball to the ground than trying to throw where Pat was covering a receiver. So I think Vance is very aware of kind of how the dynamics of football change, and just the fact that you have to elevate because now people are going to play you that much harder. Yeah,
and I do think, and Vance Joseph said it, that like late in the year there were some things that it seemed like opposing defenses, or opposing offenses figured out, right? Like in Cincinnati, and granted, Joe Burrow's a terrific quarterback, MVP candidate, but like he had success. Baltimore, when the Broncos played them, had success midway through the season. The Chargers late in that game had success, right? And so like, and some of that was the Broncos were dealing with some injuries. And so, you know, knock on wood, they stay healthy, but you're always going to deal with injuries. And so how can you, I think adding Jahdae Barron to that secondary obviously gives you more depth and helps you. You add Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga, two really impressive players in the middle of that defense. Sean Payton talked about needing to get stronger in the middle of the defense. Those things matter, and I think will pay off. But I kind of view it as like this is the right mindset of it's this chess match of how do you adapt now to what other teams are doing. Like, do they find ways? The Broncos set a franchise record for sacks last year. Do teams find a way to, like, are they going to double Nick Bonito now and not let him get there? And if that's the case, okay, well, how does Jonathan Cooper, how does Zach Allen, how does
teams preparing for JFM, Zach Allen
like,
too?
Yeah, like how did those guys get free? How does Vance Joseph scheme them up with his blitzes? We know Vance likes to blitz. Yeah. Does he have to, choose different blitzes or choose when to do it? So those things all kind of will stand out. I think for this defense, one of the kind of the two things I'm watching for is when you play a team with a young quarterback or like an offense that isn't, a top 5 offense, like, can you really get after them and put games away? We'll talk a lot about week 1 against Tennessee, but like in that game, if Denver gets a lead early and Denver can play from ahead, like, can you get after Cam Ward, sack him, force him into turnovers? Those are the things that put games out of reach. And sometimes when you're playing teams and you just let them hang around, that's when you can lose games that you shouldn't lose. And so defensively, if you can get that turnover and win the turnover battle, if you can, put them in 3rd and long, that's how you win football games. So against certain teams, like, that's kind of the standard, I think. And then when you're playing a team like the Buffalo, I know they don't play them in the regular season, but like the Buffalo Bills or the Baltimore Ravens, like teams that you will see in the postseason,
you have to get through. to get to where you want to go.
Exactly. Can you, I think that was an area where the Broncos saw that they still need to be a little bit better against the run, even though they took a big step forward last year. But then also in those crucial moments, like that fourth down play in Buffalo, still not convinced that guy caught the pass in the back of the end zone as Josh Allen scrambled around. But can you make those big plays in the big moments? That's what's going to define ultimately, I think, how successful this defense is. They've got all the pieces. They've got the consistency.
They got key guys back.
Exactly. That all sets up well. But I think Vance Joseph is right that people are going to see what you did and try to attack you. And it might mean that you've got to adjust certain things. How do they respond in that way? If they can do that, they should be able to have more success in 2025.
He mentioned just being better on third downs. And I know there's a few games that the Broncos defense had them right there, just had to, hold them to third down, and then either Mahomes or Lamar or Josh would just do a tricky play or even just catch them off guard and then get that first down and extend the drive. And so I think acknowledging that is a really big part of what makes this coaching staff so successful, and I think that's why that mindset of last year was last year. We understand we have to start from scratch all over again. And he said, my players are different. They're going to come in different. We have to figure out, because they're growing as we go through this process. So how do I, as their coach, make sure, as you mentioned, put them in the right schemes, make sure that we're blitzing at the right time to get the maximum success out of this? And when DJ Jones spoke to the media, I believe it was during OTAs, he mentioned, it's up to us to also just continue to hone in on the details. We understand what's needed. We understand that we have to pay attention to everything that's on the field and talk to each other, communicate. And I think they did a really good job of that last year. Like you said, set the franchise record for most sacks in the season. But I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me, I believe, was that Monday night game. And, things were going back and forth and mistakes were being made. And PJ Locke mentioned, Malcolm Roach grabbed all of us and was like, hey, stop. We're not in a panic. We're not in a landslide. We got this. Let's just.
Do you think that's what he said?
That's exactly what he said. I read their lips from the press box. But I'm saying,
I bet there were some other things said.
Hey guys, please let's win this game together. Yay, sports. Okay. But yes, just the fact that each guy, regardless if you're a captain or whatever, can grab the attention and each guy listens. And I feel like when new guys are coming into that scheme, there's no chaos. Everything is very solid. And when you have a guy come back like DJ Jones and you have JFM and you have all these other key pieces and pillars in your defense, it allows everyone to have a voice. And I know that Brandon Jones mentioned that he wants to now be more of a leader, amongst the team and speak out more. And obviously last year was his first year with the team, but it's that's contagious. Wanting to have a voice and wanting to lead your team and be that solid pillar is very contagious when you have so many examples of guys and you know that when you talk, they're going to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that all the pieces are in place. You just got to now find a way to go out and do it.
Yeah. And another thing we can't wait to go out and do is training camp. How excited are you for training camp? This is my first full training camp.
First full one. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Excited.
I'll be excited when it gets here.
You're going to be excited for week one. You're just going to No,
I like training camp, and we'll have a lot of content previewing training camp. I'm also trying to enjoy these few weeks. You got to be where your feet are, one day at a time.
I feel like, you're like this robot that just consumes information. So my version of you on vacation is just rebooting. You just going in.
System upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
All the knowledge is going to just.
And a little reboot, a little golf. That's all we need.
That's all you need in life. Reboot, golf, and the regular season. That's all you need in life. Well, I appreciate that. Well, Broncos country, make sure you do visit DenverBroncos.com for all the latest news and headlines. And we're going to have a lot of coverage for you leading up to the countdown of training camp. So make sure you stick with us as we close out the off season and then head into training camp, head into preseason, and then
football.
There you go.
Football.
There you go. Once again, we appreciate you guys listening to another episode of Altitude Advantage. Once again, I'm your host and team reporter, Elisa Hernandez. Across the table, we have our football robot who's going to go reboot and play golf, Aric DiLalla. And we will see you guys next time.